started recording the meeting. So if you don't want your likeness or your voice captured on the video, don't feel like you need to turn your camera on, and you can obviously communicate with us using the chat feature if you so desire. So let me start off and welcome everyone to our next US 29 Corridor Advisory Committee meeting. We'll be talking about some of the preliminary findings on the US 29 Mobility and Reliability Study. For anyone that doesn't know me already, my name is Corey Pitts with MCDOT. I'm the planning section manager and the project manager for the county on this project. With me, I've got a couple members of the team sitting here, Paul Silberman, who will also be helping me out with the presentation tonight from Mead Hunt, as well as some other members from the Mead Hunt team and the STV team who are working on the project with us. I know we're probably all very familiar with Zoom at this point, but if you need to, feel free to drop questions into the chat. I would ask that everyone please try and keep themselves on mute while we have speakers talking or someone asking a question. That way we don't end up talking over each other. When you do have a question that you'd like to ask, you can use the raise your hand feature. If you click on the reactions button in the menu tab at the bottom of the Zoom screen or the top, depending on how you have yours oriented, there's a raise your hand button, and that will indicate to us that someone has a question. And at that point, we'll ask you to unmute yourself so that you can ask your question clearly without anyone else talking over you. We are recording the meeting. We'll be posting this up on the website as soon as we can get it uploaded onto YouTube and get minutes recorded so that anyone who may have missed the meeting tonight can go back and follow along. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started and give a quick introduction and then turn things over to the team. So tonight, we'll give a very brief review of the previous study. I know many of you have been following that study. We're just going to touch on it with a couple of slides just to kind of provide a continuity between the earlier efforts and this current effort. We'll touch on the follow-on study goals and objectives, what we're trying to achieve with this additional study that's underway. Touch on the additional alternatives, the design, the costs, and what we're finding in the traffic assessment that we've performed. And then with that, we'll open it up to kind of a dialogue and talk about the findings, what people think. And then what we're trying to get out of tonight's meeting is we still have one alternative to run, what we're kind of calling the hybrid alternative, for the alternative that would take the best pieces of the alternatives that we've studied up to this point and identify what that should be. So we have a proposal for what we think that should be based on our interpretation of the results, but we would definitely appreciate y'all's feedback on that tonight. And then we'll go away for a little bit more analysis. And so I'll touch on next steps and kind of what the schedule is looking forward. So the two initial primary alternatives were a median bus lane between Tech Road and Sligo Creek Parkway, and the managed lane, or the rush hour bus and HOV lane between Musgrove Road and Spring Street, with the current bus on shoulder north of Musgrove Road. So the images you see on here are just conceptual. That's not what the whole corridor looked like based on all those alternatives. Again, this is just a summary, but those were the two primary alternatives that were studied in the initial effort. Along with those two primary alternatives, there were a number of supplemental alternatives or options that were considered. There were 6 intersection or interchange improvements that were studied, and those were part of some of the alternatives on the previous slide. There was also a number of system and demand management measures to help try to reduce non-recurring congestion and encourage carpooling. And then, if you recall, there were pedestrian and bicycle improvements that were identified to improve access and safety around the stations between Silver Spring in Tech Road. So with that, there were roughly over 200 biking and pedestrian recommendations that were pulled from various master plans, the bicycle master plan, and other previous efforts that were identified that would help support access and safety around the stations. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Paul, who's going to kind of touch on kind of where the study is going at this point with the goals and the new alternatives.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks, Chris. So as Chris mentioned, we're expanding our alternatives, really revising primarily the median bus lane in this further study. So we did get some feedback, both from the public as well as the council and stakeholder agencies like Park and Planning. And really what we're focusing on this time around, the alternatives you're going to see in more detail in the coming slides is about improving the median bus lane for both traffic and transit operations. There were some issues with the original design in the previous study that, sort of made it less desirable from a purely traffic and transit operations and performance. We also want to make the median bus lane more cost effective. It was significantly more expensive in the last study, so we're going to be looking at some value engineering, and then we wanted to provide clarity regarding what the alternatives might be able to do in terms of high occupancy vehicle or transit mode shift if we got better travel times for carpools and flash riders up and down the corridor, and then really make sure that every one of the intersection improvements, the spot intersection improvements, had an independent value, on their own merit, and should be included. Next slide. So again, the nomenclature here for the alternatives are really kind of critical, and we'll keep reminding everyone of these as we move throughout the presentation. But primarily, the first part of the study had a managed lane alternative, which had bus and HOV lanes in different configurations, and had a median bus lane alternative that we're calling the baseline. That was a concept developed by some citizen advocates. So this new study has 3 new alternatives we're presenting tonight, and then we want your input on a 4th sort of hybrid alternative. So the first alternative, the new alternative we're going to share, the design and the operations, is what we call the median bus lane plus those intersection improvements, and we'll get to those a little bit later where they are. And then the 2B is what we call the median bus lane optimized. So that's just taking the original median bus lane and making it work as well as possible, regardless of cost, to keep traffic and transit flowing up and down the corridor. And then the median bus lane value engineered is to really just to bring the cost down without functioning too much the overall operation. So 2A, B, and C, and the original managed lane alternative 1. And then there will be a 2D, sort of a hybrid alternative, and we'll go over those elements at the end of this call for your input. Next slide. So again, the different design elements that we're evaluating along the corridor and ingrained into these alternatives are intersection improvements, so physical improvements to the intersection for vehicles, for pedestrians, for buses, added lanes, pedestrian crossings, pedestrian signals, queue jumps for the buses, new traffic signals at locations where they don't exist today, the location and design of the station, of the flash station itself. So whether that's a new station, a relocated station, from the curbside to the median. So we have some example or detail illustrations of that. The transit guideway itself, there's a lot of different configurations that we looked at up and down the corridor, from shoulder to a single lane median, double lane, etc. And then the construction cost and the transit and traffic operations, right? The level of service for vehicles, the travel time for all modes, and how many people it's moving up and down the corridor. Next slide. And so just a little refresher on the transitway design options. And I want to start by noting that if the bus is in mixed traffic, that there's not an exclusive lane for transit. That's not pictured on the screen. That's basically what the flash runs in today. That is an option in some segments. We just didn't have a picture of it. So the first one is a bus on shoulder, and that's in the top. So at certain times of the day, the bus is allowed to run on the shoulder and bypass regular traffic. Then what we call a managed lane. It could be a rush hour only lane that is used exclusively for buses, when at other times of the day, it's used for cars. In some alternatives, it's buses and carpool vehicles, and it's only in the peak direction. And at other times of the day, it would be just the way it is in existing conditions, open to all traffic. And then we have a single median reversible lane, which means that in some times of the day, only say southbound flash buses would be in it. Other times of the day, northbound, or they would alternate and pull over and let the buses pass each other. And then of course the dual, which is the largest footprint, but that would have a median with the bus lane for each direction of travel, northbound and southbound. So those are the main design options that we looked at. Next slide. So again, alternative number one was from the earlier study, and that was the managed bus and HOV lane. So it had all 6 intersection improvements at Greencastle, Tech, Stewart, the 650 interchange, the I-495 interchange, Beltway interchange, and Sligo Creek. It had no new traffic signals beyond what is out there today or what SHA is independently going to be building in the corridor. There were no changes to the station locations or designs that are already up and running for flash service right now. And it had dedicated bus lane segments and as a managed lane from Musgrove to Stewart, and from 650 to Burnt Mill, and then from Sligo Creek to Spring Street. So it had to downtown. So it had several segments of managed lanes, and the remaining segments were mixed traffic. It did not change any of the lane widths, and operationally, it was pretty well. It ran pretty well. Only 7 signalized intersections were failing in the peak hour. So next slide. So for the median bus lane, again, this is the baseline version. It only had 1 intersection improvement, and that was the interchange improvement at the Beltway that allowed a second lane to exit to go westbound towards Bethesda. It had 6 new traffic signals proposed up and down the corridor. It had a new location for the station, both at Burnt Mills and at Four Corners. And it had a dual median busway from Tech to Stewart, Timberwood to the Beltway, and a single median bus lane from Stewart to Timberwood and from the Beltway to Sligo. So it had the buses in a median type of facility for a large percentage of the corridor. It reduced the lane widths in some sections to 10 feet for general traffic to squeeze all that in. But operationally, it did create a significant amount of congestion in the remaining lanes at about 13 signalized intersections failing. Next slide. So these are the new alternatives that we're presenting tonight. So alternative 2A is the median bus lane plus the intersection improvements. So that's pretty much the baseline. And all we did was add in the 6 intersections from the managed lane to make sure that we were comparing apples to apples. So that's in there, and we'll report a little bit more on how that did the impact of travel time for buses and cars in a couple more slides. Next. For 2B, the median bus lane. So again, this was to try to optimize the travel times for all modes. So we had the 6 intersection improvements. We had 5 new traffic signals. We did relocate Burnt Mills to the median at Hillwood, and we did add a new BRT station, flash station at Franklin Avenue. And in this one, we had a dual median bus lane from Tech to Stewart, single median bus lane from Stewart to Timberwood, Beltway to Sligo, and then south of Sligo Creek in the curb lane, this is where the reversible lane section is today, we did restrict that lane to buses only in the southbound direction and buses only in the northbound direction in the evening outbound. So we removed one general purpose lane for vehicles so that the buses could continue to have a dedicated lane between Sligo and downtown Silver Spring Transit Center. Next slide. In 2C, we value engineered. So we only put in one intersection improvement at Greencastle. We only put in 3 new traffic signals. We did relocate the Burnt Mill Station. And we did relocate the Lanark, the Four Corners Station to Lanark, but we did not add a station at Franklin. We kept a dedicated bus lane on the shoulders between Tech and Stewart, and as a single reversible lane from Stewart to Sligo. And then we did implement a curbside bus only lane from Sligo to downtown Silver Spring. And we did not change the lane widths. So that was alternative C. So, you can see some differences here between the throwing in all the intersection improvements, optimizing the operations and cost engineering, a little bit of value engineering to try to balance the performance with the cost of the median bus lane. Next slide. So then just a little bit more on introducing this concept of a curbside lane, because it's a little bit complicated because we're not proposing to remove the reversible lane that's there today. So in the morning, you have 4 travel lanes southbound and 2 northbound. What we would be proposing is that you would have 3 car travel lanes southbound and a curbside bus lane. And then in the evening, you would have 3 general car travel lanes outbound and 1 curbside bus lane. So that would require a little bit of updating some of the overhead electronic lane use signs, but it essentially wouldn't move any curbs, or add any medians or anything like that. So that's just a little bit on how that bus only lane in the reversible section would work. Now in the managed lane alternative, we had actually proposed that the reversible lane itself be used for buses and carpools. So not the shoulder, but the reversible lane. So only at the hours that the reversible lane was in operation. Next slide. So I'm going to turn it over to Kyle to talk about what that meant in terms of bus and car travel time for the different alternatives.
Thanks, Paul. So if we'll walk through each of these scenarios and from going from left to right, and this goes through both the original scenarios that we analyzed as well as these new additional ones. And so starting on the left, you have existing conditions, and where you have 2 bars, the one on the left is your passenger vehicles, your general vehicle, and then the bar on the right is your BRT or your transit travel time. And so if you do nothing, you would get the light blue. And so with traffic growth over the next few years, your general purpose vehicle travel times are going to bump up to 55 minutes. And your BRT travel time is going to be 43 minutes or so almost as long. And this makes sense in a lot of cases, just because you're in mixed use traffic. So you're going to generally be have some of those delays and queues. So then the managed lane alternative, what that did was it either added maybe a hard running shoulder for the peak direction for HOV, which would be multi-passenger cars as well as BRT, or it repurposed one of the existing lanes as a HOV lane and transit lane. And so that really ended up improving both passenger vehicle travel time and BRT travel time over the no build condition. And so your passenger vehicle time really went down to like around what it is today, like 33, 34 minutes, and your BRT travel time went down to 23 minutes. Now, when we originally looked at the median bus lane alternative, that ended up having operations similar to passenger vehicles in the no build. You were in the 53 or so minute range. And so you're really close as far as you were taking away a general purpose lane in some instances, and through Four Corners in particular. But that was comparable to the no build conditions. And then the BRT in the southbound direction had similar times to what the managed lane had. You were in the 23, 24 minute range. And so the other iterations that we did, we added those intersection improvements to the median bus lane alternative. And those intersection improvements, they did improve both vehicle travel time and BRT travel time by 3 minutes and 1 minute respectively. So there was some benefit, although it wasn't super significant in adding those intersection improvements. Then we went to the optimized scenario, which was really to prioritize transit in particular. And so this was making some of the stations in the median and providing access and new signals to and from those stations, et cetera. And so that did improve the BRT travel time by another minute or so. And your passenger vehicles stayed in that 50-minute range, pretty similar. Then I'll talk about this scenario, this sub scenario more, the dark blue, to be modified is what we'll call it. I'll talk about it more in the PM because it's more noticeable of why we tested it. But it was in the southbound direction in the AM, it was pretty similar to the orange or the 2B scenario. But what that did is that changed what was happening in the reversible lane section in Silver Spring. And then ultimately, the value engineering scenario, we removed some things that we thought you weren't really getting a bang for the buck. Maybe it was a few intersection improvements. Maybe it was a few signals that we thought might not be necessary. Maybe there could be some things that could be saved cost-wise. And so that did increase your vehicle travel times as well as your BRT travel times by a couple of minutes. But in general, it was still very similar. So next slide. So in the PM, we have a similar story. We're going from left to right with all the same scenarios. The managed lane operated better than the no build scenario. And then the median bus lane, the maroon scenario kind of in the middle is where things started to break down for that initial scenario. And that was primarily for general purpose cars going in the northbound direction. And so through Four Corners, there was a lane reduction. So it was going from 4 lanes to 3 lanes. There's also several new signals just north of Four Corners that were included, which was like Timberwood, Crestmore, et cetera. And one second. I'm sorry about that. My dog is barking. I apologize if you can hear that in the background. So the median bus lane scenario had some issues and was up to 65 minutes. And so then one second. I really apologize about that. Sorry. So in 2A, with the intersection improvements, the goal of that was really to do a more of an apples to apples comparison to improve that northbound condition, which really had that additional lane through Four Corners, the impacts of losing that fourth lane, the impacts of those additional signals. And so we wanted to see if things could be improved. And so that did have some improvements. We also were able to refine some of the timings and stuff through those new signals at Lockwood, which was able to reduce it to 48 minutes or so for general vehicles. And then BRT was pretty consistent because you had your BRT lane. For the median bus lane optimized scenario, that really was focused on transit. And so we were able to really decrease that BRT travel time. And one of the improvements there is some of the station locations. And so you're saving some of your queue jumps and stuff that were required in the initial median bus lane, particularly at the Lockwood station, which was located off of US 29. And so there were some pretty complex queue jumps to get to and from that station. Whereas in the optimized scenario, we're putting it in the median on US 29 at Hillwood. Now in the PM here is where you really start to see the difference between 2B and 2B optimized with the reversible lane. And so in Silver Spring, what happens is in the northbound leaving in the PM, it really becomes very congested under the orange scenario. And you have a lot of queue spill back by putting in that dedicated bus lane. And that's really congesting up things in Silver Spring and whatnot, and creating really that additional travel time. And so if you do remove that reversible lane, which has the dedicated lane, bus lane in it, in the PM, you are able to really greatly reduce your vehicle travel times. Now that is slightly at the expense of transit. So you do have a 3-minute increase between the orange and the blue, but it is a very significant benefit to passenger vehicles. And then in our value engineering scenario, this also included the northbound dedicated lane south of Sligo. And that really increased your travel times, again, right into that 50-minute range. And your BRT stayed fairly consistent to the orange scenario. You were removing some of those intersection improvements and removing some of those signals. So there is a slight increase over the optimized scenario. And then, so this really focuses on that Silver Spring segment between the Sligo Creek Parkway and the Silver Spring Transit Center. And really the northbound is the telling story, where if you are putting in a dedicated bus lane, you have that fairly significant increase in travel times. But by taking it away, you do increase BRT travel time by 3 minutes, but you are getting that like 15-minute reduction in regular vehicle travel time. So that's really the telling story there. And now we'll talk a little bit about the cost, and Matt will talk about some of the different alternatives and what those costs look like.
Thanks, Kyle. So essentially what we've done is we've taken all of the alternative analysis and findings from the work that Kyle and Paul have done, and we've developed concept plans and cost estimates for each. The other thing that we've done here, you'll notice at the top it says adjusted to 2022 dollars. The original work that we did a few years ago on the managed lane and the original median bus lane, those of course were based on cost estimates at that time. We've now updated those costs based on the most recent State Highway Administration cost estimating manual and unit price index. So the previous managed lane and that Alt 2 median bus lane baseline costs, the previous costs were a bit lower, and so they've been increased to reflect those new unit prices and cost estimating manual. be no surprise that those costs have been increased. Excuse me. So the managed lane cost increased. I think it was, in excluding those two $25 million add-ons, it was around 45. It's now up to 55. But then when we add the priority intersection improvements and also the station improvements to that managed lane cost, that's now 105. The original median bus lane baseline, I believe, was 106. That's now up to 133. Alt 2A is essentially Alt 2 plus those intersection improvements. Once we add those intersection improvements, that adds not quite 25 million because there was some overlap in the original median bus lane concept. So it didn't quite increase by 25 million, but it went up to 151. Excuse me. By optimizing it, the cost actually dropped a little bit to 149. The 2B is where we dropped the dedicated lane south of Sligo. So we saved about $2 million there. And then when we started to value engineer it to cut out some elements, we dropped it down to 123. So it's a bit lower than the original median bus lane baseline. Next slide. So right now, I'm just going to go through a couple of the station locations just to show some of the key differences. We'll look at Burnt Mills, we'll look at Four Corners, and then we'll finish up taking a look at the new Franklin Avenue station. So this was the original median bus baseline station concept at the Burnt Mills location. You can see it's off the alignment in that triangular space right there at Lockwood. That resulted in additional traffic signals and some complex signal phasing in order to move buses in and out of that space. Now, these costs that you're seeing on this slide, it's not limited to the station. This cost is actually a segment of 29, so it includes all of the infrastructure necessary to provide the bus facility. And this particular segment runs from that northwest branch to a little bit north of Lockwood Drive. Next slide. So 2B was to move that station into the median. This is a concept that's station concept that's similar to what's being proposed on 355. This did have is be able to provide these two median stations. Did have some right-of-way impacts on that south side. You'll see that there is an auto body shop and also a convenience mart on that south side, just south of Hillwood. Those are adversely impacted. So that right-of-way cost is included. But there is a little bit less sort of infrastructure related costs because we've moved those stations out of that triangular island and into the median. We did hold the west side curb line because of the retaining wall adjacent to that parking lot on the west side. We didn't want to impact that or have to add a second retaining wall. And then finally, in the next slide is the value engineer concept, Alt 2C. And what we've done is we've maintained one of the stations in the median, but we have shifted the northbound station over onto the right-hand curb line going north. You'll see that there's two purple rectangles. Those were two different station location concepts that we took a look at. They're labeled 3A and 3B because this alternate used to be alternate 3. It's now 2C. But they both have similar impacts and there's really no difference in cost, regardless of where that northbound curb line station is to be located. And that cost dropped us down to about 14 million for that segment of 29. Next slide. So this is the location at Four Corners. This is the original median bus lane baseline. That included a dual busway and station platforms either side of eastbound University Boulevard. As Paul and Kyle noted, this removed one through lane on 29 in both directions. And that cost for this segment, which really runs from the Beltway to Timberwood, was a little less than 16 million. Next slide. 2B was optimized. It, excuse me, it also maintained a two-way or two-lane busway. It kept the station location at 29 and east and on either side of eastbound 193 University Boulevard. The difference in cost here is you recall that the baseline median busway reduced some of the travel lanes to as narrow as 10 feet. In this particular optimized concept, we bumped it back up to a minimum of 11. 10 is a bit narrow for a state highway to approve and agree to. So we push these lane widths to 11 or existing. And so that's really the difference in cost between 2A and 2B. And then finally, next slide is 2C, which is optimized. The difference here is we've obviously shifted the station south to Lanark. The other key difference that's represented in this location is that it put that fourth northbound lane back in this area. One concern is the potential impact to the high school running track in that location. It gets quite tight in that location. And then lastly, we took a look at the feasibility of including a new station at Franklin. What's shown here is in order to minimize impact to right-of-way, we have one station located in the median, and then the northbound station is located on the side of the road. We've pushed that northbound station into the area where that little slip ramp roadway is to go from Franklin to go north on 29. It may look a little bit odd because that location is on a curve and our station platforms have to be tangent. They have to be a tangent level platform for passengers to safely board and alight. The cost there, that 3.9 million that's shown there in the first bullet on the right, that is just the cost, unlike some of the other costs that we were looking at, which was a full segment of 29. This is simply the additional cost to add a station to the project. I think turn it back to Paul.
Thanks, Matt. So again, I know there was a ton of information going through the alternatives overview, the traffic operations, transit operations, the concept plans for the stations, and all of these cost numbers. So these next few slides are kind of just to refresh, bring it all back together, and show you we're going to kind of walk through the corridor in a table and line up the different improvements by color code here. So you can see side by side how each alternative looks different as you're moving from the north end of the corridor to the south end of the corridor. So the yellow is the buses on the shoulder. The green is a bus only lane. The blue, light blue, is that it's a managed lane for the buses and carpools. Purple is single, dark blue is double, and mixed is no color. And you'll see some symbols for signals, intersection improvement stations. So next slide. I'm not going to read every line here, but again, as you start all the way up in Burtonsville, you can now see the alternatives laid out side by side: the managed lane, the baseline median, the median plus intersection improvements, the median plus the bus lane optimized, and the median plus the bus lane value engineered. And so really in the northern part of the corridor, it's pretty consistent, right? There's not a lot of improvements recommended up here. There's an intersection improvement at Greencastle, most of the alternatives. And then as you get south of Musgrove, that's where it starts to differentiate. So the managed lane kicks in alternative 1 at Musgrove, some intersection improvements at Tech. And then once you get to industrial, a dual busway would kick in alternate 2, 2A and 2B. Next slide. As we head further south, Stewart to 650, the dual bus lane in several of the alts converts to a shoulder bus lane. Got new signals at Oakleaf in several of the alternatives. New signals at Northwest in several of the alternatives. Almost all of the alternatives for the median bus lane in this segment have a single median bus lane. And then we have a station relocation in Hillwood in alternative 2B and 2C instead of Lockwood, as well as the managed lane. And we have a new signal at Hillwood, a new signal at Crestwood, and many of the alternatives. Let's keep rolling south. And as we get to Four Corners between the Beltway and Timberwood, you can see that alt 2, 2A, 2B, and a little bit in 2C keep a dual bus lane. And most of them keep a signal at Timberwood, keep the station exactly at Four Corners, although there is alt 2C that moves the station to Lanark. And then all of them have the common intersection improvement at the Beltway ramps. Moving south, all of the alternatives except the managed have a new signal at Hastings. Moving south, we keep a single reversible lane. Next slide. And then the single reversible lane down to Sligo, where many of the alternatives have an intersection improvement, and one of the alternatives has a new station at Franklin. And then moving south into the reversible lane section, we have a managed lane in alternative 1, and we have a bus-only lane, southbound in the morning, northbound in the evening, in 2B and 2C, and it's all the way to downtown transit center in the very bottom row at Spring Street. Next slide. Oh, sorry, a couple more blocks I forgot. Station at Fenton and carrying the bus-only lane all the way down to Wayne at the transit center. Next slide. So based on everything we presented, again, these are new alternatives in a lot of detail and a lot of information on their cost, design, and performance. But this is what we're proposing to you as the CAC for your explicit feedback tonight as a hybrid option. So we're suggesting that the intersection improvements that be included is just Greencastle, that 4 new signals be included at I believe at Hillwood, Hastings, Oakleaf, and Timberwood. That the station be relocated to Burnt Mills, northbound in the outer lane, southbound in the median. We keep the new station at Franklin. We run a dedicated bus lane on the shoulder between Tech and Stewart, a single lane between Stewart to Four Corners, a dual median lane, median bus lanes through Four Corners, and then run the outer lane south of Sligo Creek, a bus-only lane along the curb in the morning only. And we do not change the lane widths except around the Paint Branch Bridge crossing, so we don't have to build a new bridge. That is what we're proposing, and we have not costed this out yet, and we have not tested it for traffic and transit performance. We are simply defining it as a hybrid of all of the information and investigation we have done to date. Next slide. So with that, I'll turn it back to Corey and he'll wrap, and we really look forward to your comments.
So I know that was a lot we've got plenty of time to go back through slides and answer questions and get into a more detailed discussion, but I did want to kind of touch on, what we envision to be the remainder of the schedule for this phase of the project, and the next steps associated with it. So we've got the CAC meeting tonight. We're hoping for a good conversation to then inform that hybrid alternative, that last alternative that we're going to run through. So after tonight, we'll take the feedback from the CAC, as well as the feedback that we've received from Park and Planning and SHA, and build that hybrid alternative and run it. So we'll complete the analysis over the summer. As in addition to that final alternative, there is also what we're calling a short-term alternative. So there's a recognition that if one of these median alternatives ultimately gets selected, it's probably a longer-term alternative. It still needs to work through design and then identify funding for construction. But there are probably still some things that we can do in the short term to improve travel along the corridor. So there will be, we won't call it an alternative because it's not really being compared against the other ones, but we will identify some short-term measures that can be done in the interim state to improve performance along the corridor for traffic as well as the BRT. Once we've finished all that analysis over the summer, and depending on how long it takes, we'll come back to the CAC to share the final results, either in late summer or early fall. Based on the feedback from you all, we will then take results out to the public for a final meeting. So that would be our 4th public meeting for the entirety of this planning phase of the US 29 phase 2. Again, in late summer or early fall, we'll go back to the planning board and the T&E committee and collect feedback from them. And ultimately the T&E committee will have the option to select an alternative to then move forward into preliminary engineering. And following all that, there'll be a finalization of the report and the recommendations. So with that, we will open up the discussion and Q&A. I see Dan, you've got your hand raised. So if you want to go ahead and ask your question, and we'll kick things off.
Actually, I have multiple. On the Franklin station, could you explain why you think the station's needed there?
So when we had the meetings late last year in December between the CAC as well as the larger community meeting, we heard from a number of people during those meetings, as well as we've heard even back during the initial planning and design of the US 29 Flash, that there's a desire to have a station between the Beltway and Silver Spring, that those people feel like they're getting left out on the ability to use the Flash to either travel south or to travel north. So that was an attempt to see what we could do to put in a station somewhere between the Beltway and downtown Silver Spring. It looks like Franklin is probably the best location to do it without having too many impacts to right-of-way and property. But that was why we looked at it, is we had heard feedback numerous times of people wanting a station between the Beltway and downtown.
Second point is it possible to get a copy of these slides? It's really hard to follow all the details without going back through and bouncing back and forth.
Yes, we will. I will PDF this. Unfortunately, we were refining and working through the details as late as this morning, so I didn't get an opportunity to PDF it, but I will PDF it and send out a copy to the CAC, and then of course it'll also get posted up on the website. Okay.
All the alternatives, and I'm not sure I fully understand this. I've had a headache all day, and you're not helping the situation. But anyway, I'm thinking the last one you did, what was it called, the modified or the anyway, I think 4C and the modified, either one of those things looks pretty good, or 2C And then what was the modified one? Where you doing pit?
So, yeah, so the distinction between the modified one doesn't show up here. The distinction between the modified and 2B is that it doesn't have the bus lane between Sligo Creek Parkway and the transit center. That was when we looked at that and we saw the results in the PM and we saw how long the travel time for cars was getting coming out of Silver Spring in the evening. We asked ourselves, this doesn't seem like it's something that could be supported. So we pulled out that piece to see what the impact was to transit and to cars. And obviously what we saw was the travel time for cars decreased and the travel time for the BRT didn't increase by that much. So that's the distinction. It's really a variation of 2B.
Okay, but I agree with that. Is that part of what's in 2C?
It is in 2C. So the distinction with 2C is it only proposes the bus lane in the morning. So we would not do the evening bus lane because of the impacts to travel time. There was negligible, there was really no difference between AM with or without the bus lane for cars and BRT.
Yeah, I don't see a particular need for bus lane or bus dedicated lanes south of Sligo Creek, like you were saying. There's so minimal amount of time savings. I'm not sure it's worth it. And I would think that would just add more confusion to the drivers, the passenger vehicle drivers. So anyway, overall, I think either the 2C or the one where you're picking bits and pieces of the stuff together, the one you guys have yet to analyze.
Right. Okay.
That's all I have.
All right. Thanks, Dan. Cicero.
Good evening, Corey. Thank you for the presentation. Like Dan said, it's a lot of information, so I'll reserve, comments for after I take a closer look at it. But I'm glad you guys presented, all those different options. The one question I have, Corey, as you all know, Viva White Oak is slated for future development. That's going to be pretty huge. There's some plans for, interchanges that State Highway has had for last, I think, 20 years, which have been shelved. Do the proposals allow southbound double left turns into Industrial and Tech Road?
Paul or Matt, I'm pretty sure it does, but
Yes.
I don't want to misspeak.
Yes, I believe if it's not an existing condition, I think it is at one and not on the other. We did make a proposed recommendation to make them both dual laps in.
Okay, thanks. I mean, that's really, a big concern I had. And like I said, I'll take a look at the alternatives, but there seems to be a lot of good stuff there to improve service and reduce those travel times. So I just wanted to thank everyone for, the hard work.
Okay, thanks. Sanjita?
Yes, thank you very much for this. It's a lot. Can you go back to the travel time slide?
Sure.
There's just a lot going on here. And while you're doing that, I was like wondering why you didn't just go with, I guess, 2B, which seemed to have like the best optimization of travel time for both. The one, maybe it was like the northbound direction where it was.
Yeah. So what we see here is that
Or the 2B optimized.
Yeah, you mean this one?
Yes.
So in many ways, what we're proposing as the hybrid, and Paul, you can step in and fix any of my errors. What we're proposing as the hybrid alternative is really the best of probably 2B modified, and 2C. So it takes some of the value engineered suggestions, such as not building a brand new crossing over the Paint Branch and instead running on the shoulder up in that piece. Bringing in, not doing a full 2-lane station through Burnt Mills, but doing kind of the modified station, doing the optimized station at 193 and 29 as opposed to the one at Lanark, given the impacts to the school. And then once you get down to Sligo Creek, what we're proposing with the hybrid is to take advantage of the bus lane heading southbound, again, because we don't see much of a change. And again, I think what we're envisioning is, there's a note about it being a pilot. We probably wouldn't go to the level of upgrading all the overhead digital signs, but instead trying to do something more piloty,
Okay.
like just signage and some pavement markings, so that, we think, based on the way it's modeled, it looks like it would work in the southbound direction, and again, not impact traffic. But if, when it, put it in real world conditions, reflect something different, we could always pull it back out. But we're not proposing to do the northbound bus lane as part of the hybrid option, just given what we're showing here in the travel time, with the difference between 52 minutes and 37 minutes for cars in the northbound, recognizing that, and I'm sure, all my friends in the Four Corners area, will share this, is that, the worse we make it for cars on 29, they're going to look for alternative routes. So if we're making it difficult to get out of downtown Silver Spring, they're going to start, coming off the corridor and working their way into neighborhoods and trying to find different paths. And that's something I think, ideally we want to try to
What
avoid.
navigation apps are going to make them do that? That's
Yeah.
on them.
Yes, our smartphones are going to take over our brains and drive for us.
Because I once had an app try to make me turn left out of a neighborhood onto US 29, and it made no sense.
And Corey, I do think that our hybrid scenario would probably look more like this dark blue scenario, the 2B modified, when we do run the results, because the biggest difference is that northbound dedicated bus lane south of Sligo being removed in that 2B modified, and we are not including it in what we're proposing. So
thanks, Kyle.
I also just wanted to, I put this in the chat, but I think that what I've noticed, and I've taken Flash occasionally, is that like the biggest challenge here is that you spent all this money with all these studies and implementation, but the ridership still seems very low compared to the other WMATA buses, the Z buses that run in that corridor. And so anything that can make this sort of a more attractive and faster and efficient ride is I think what you want to do. Otherwise, like, you in order to get a good return on this investment. And I'm concerned about adding another stop at Franklin, and that's just defeating the purpose of this being sort of an express bus through this corridor. You can, like, not every neighborhood is going to have a stop.
And these are the types of comments that we want to get. It was a request, that seemed to have a number of people supporting. So we wanted to at least look at it and consider it and see what it does.
Yeah, I guess you can see how much travel time that's likely to add.
Yeah, I mean, what I can say about the existing Flash service is, and unfortunately, it looks like we had Dan Hibbert with us, I think, at the beginning of the meeting. I don't see him here with us anymore, but there was a lot of thought given into, as the Flash stations were being constructed, as to how Ride-On and Metrobus should adjust their routes to better support and work with the Flash service. And then when the pandemic hit, all plans were frozen. So no changes have been made to any of the other bus routes along the corridor, really just the addition of the Flash. What I can say about the Flash is, given the fact that we haven't really marketed it, and we just opened the service, is that when you look at it compared to other ride-on routes in the county, it's actually performing pretty well for a brand new service. And there's usually a build-up time as you kind of build a base of ridership. So there are some positive aspects that we've seen, recognizing that it's been a really difficult situation to try and open a brand new service in the height of a period of time where everyone was staying home and very few people were traveling. So you know,
Yeah, and there are a lot of choices already in that corridor, so I guess the
right.
consolidation has to happen with some of the other routes.
Well, and so, you know, going on right now, you know, they haven't gotten obviously to the recommendations phase, but Ride-On is doing the Reimagine study. They're looking at all of the bus routes in the county, and they are also working with our colleagues over at Metrobus. They're doing the same thing. They're looking at all the routes in the county comprehensively with an eye towards the BRT routes and the corridors that are currently, you know, being designed, and thinking about how the system should look in the future. You know, there was a lot of desire from the community to suggest, you know, that perhaps Ride-On needed, you know, kind of a rethinking, like many other municipalities have done over the past couple of years, to think about what transit looks like in the future. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that in terms of route recommendations in concert with the BRT.
Thank you.
I see, Dan, you've got your hand raised. Did you just not lower it, or? Oh, there you go. And let's see, I'm looking at the chat. No.
Can I ask some questions? This is Harriet.
Yes, sure. Go ahead, Harriet.
Thank you for this presentation. Can you go to the timeline slide? The timeline for
the next steps?
Yeah.
Here, just gonna escape out.
While you're pulling that up, did you say you already presented this to SHA and Park and Planning?
So we did, screen sharing apparently stopped. So we did, we shared the preliminary results. We had a joint meeting with planning and with SHA to share those preliminary findings that we just shared with you all, to kind of get their reaction to the preliminary findings, as well as solicit their feedback on that hybrid alternative. I mean, we have purposefully, you know, held back on running that one because we wanted feedback from really all the stakeholders who, you know, have an interest in this study. You know, SHA as the owner of the road, and the ultimate, you know, approver of anything that would, you know, change US 29. The planning department, who has obviously, you know, been a strong partner in, you know, advancing the BRT projects, and, you know, has interest in how they relate back to, you know, the development plans and land use plans and corridor plans. And then obviously the CAC, you know, valuing y'all's feedback, given, you know, your close relationship to the corridor.
Okay, so, and what was their feedback?
So we're still, the planning department is still pulling together. They've given us feedback on the general presentation. So what you all saw tonight, you can thank the planning department, because we got a lot of comments from them about the initial presentation not being all that legible. So if you still think it's confusing and a lot of information to digest, just be thankful you didn't see the initial version of this. But they're still working on pulling together their thoughts and comments on that hybrid alternative. So we haven't, I don't have any additional details to share with you at this time.
Okay, well, so my concern, one of many, is in looking at this timeline, you're going to develop the final alternatives, and yet this is the first time anybody, you know, in the community is seeing all of this information. It's very hard to digest in a short period. And the purpose of the CAC was for community representatives to bring information back to their neighborhoods to get their feedback in order to provide you with, you know, constructive feedback after a full analysis. However, I know my neighborhood association has recessed for the summer. There's no opportunity to meet about this. Our last meeting was in May, and I'm pretty sure the other adjacent communities are in the same position. And so you're going to move forward without us having the opportunity to really have I mean, there's a lot of good information here, but this is more information than we ever had, more changes than we ever had before through this CAC process. So I'm a little concerned that there isn't time for the various communities to digest this and get constructive feedback. And given your timeline, I don't really understand why, you know, all of a sudden now it's moving so quickly after we waited, what, 2 years or something for this analysis? So that is my overall impression. And then I just have individual questions about some of the intersections.
Okay, so in terms of this study's timeline, if you look at the whole study's timeline, yes, it's been, you know, a couple of years. This effort itself,
Just for this phase, though, a couple of years. I mean, just for this thing where we're now looking at a whole different phase after we went through 2 years before that of other alternatives. But go ahead.
so I believe, and again, I wasn't managing this initial study, but I believe it kicked off in 2018 and looked at just those two initial alternatives, the managed lane and what we're now calling the baseline median. We took results back to T&E in winter 2021. That study took longer to work through. This additional piece with the new alternatives that we shared with you just kicked off last fall. So maybe that's probably what feels fast, is that the second piece has been moving faster, and that's been at the direction of T&E. Is, you know, they were seeking, you know, a quick review of those additional alternatives and to come back to them. You know, I'm happy, you know, I hear what you're saying, that this is a lot of information to digest, and that, you know, there's not much meeting taking place over the summer. So, you know, I'm happy to go back, you know, to our leadership and share those thoughts, and you know, we can consider that. You know, I'm not making any promises tonight, but I'm, you know, happy to discuss this and see if we can make adjustments to the schedule and still meet, you know, all the needs that have been kind of laid on us in terms of trying to move this forward.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm surprised you met with the other stakeholders, and now we're in the summer and the communities are supposed to provide you with feedback, and we hadn't even seen anything. So it seems like it should have been done in reverse. And I think in the past, you went through the CAC process first, and then you went to the planning department, and SHA was actually involved in our CACs from the beginning. So I just think it's too much information to be able to provide you with constructive feedback from a broad, a broad outreach. There isn't enough broad outreach to the community if you're trying to get this recommendation by the fall.
So what we're asking tonight is not to choose an alternative. We're seeking feedback based on the three alternatives that we've run on what the fourth alternative, what elements of the original three or the new three should be included in that fourth alternative. We will be coming back probably in the fall. I know it says summer, but you know, some people consider September summer. We will probably be coming back in September with a final reckoning of everything and giving everyone time, both the CAC and the broader community, because there'll be meetings for both, time to digest the results and provide ample feedback before we would go to the planning board in T&E and seek their input. So this is not the last opportunity or kind of, I guess, the big ask, which is which alternative does the community support. This is an interim step to try and get feedback as we work through the actual analysis.
Okay, well, I can't even keep them all straight right now and after you sit through the slides, so I can't provide any feedback on,
Okay,
you know, things. I'm wondering what your time frame is to get feedback.
Harriet, I hear you. Like I said, I will go back to my leadership who have charged me with a task, and I'm trying to deliver on that task as any of us would when given a task. I will go back to them and share the feedback that I'm hearing, and we will figure out what we can do to accommodate the needs of the CAC.
Okay, and then a couple of questions on the intersection improvements. So do you have an intersection improvement built in for New Hampshire southbound 29 at New Hampshire?
Some of the alternatives do, and some of them don't. If we go back to, shouldn't be that many slides. One more. So the managed lane had the addition of that third southbound lane, 2A, which is the original baseline median alternative with those common intersection improvements. And then 2B, we pulled it out of the value engineered alternative, given the fact that it was one of the more expensive alternatives and didn't seem to show as much benefit when we actually considered the cost.
So at New Hampshire in 2C, there would only be one lane of traffic southbound, of general traffic, excuse me. Since it's
No, there
only
would
two
still be
lanes.
two. The lanes would not change.
Okay, because it's, maybe I'm not reading your chart correctly. It says single,
That's for the bus,
reverse.
single median bus lane,
Oh, in the median, okay.
correct.
But you wouldn't widen there to
Only-
accommodate median bus?
Matt, do you recall whether we had to widen there?
Not specifically. I would have to take a look at the concept plans to verify exactly whether there was space in the existing median to accommodate that single bus lane. I'll take a quick look. Okay, I'll let you know in a few minutes.
Thanks, Matt.
Okay, and then, so everything north of Tech Road for the transit would be on the shoulder still? I mean, I thought it would have a dedicated lane in the median on some alternative. If you're still going to use the shoulder, which isn't really even being used now, I don't understand why, but.
So there was, as part of the managed lane alternative, we did look at a hardening of the interior shoulder to accommodate the BRT and the HOV. We didn't find in the original work that much in terms of travel time benefits to building that infrastructure. So it was not recommended and hasn't really been carried forward, but we do have the costs for that. So we can definitely, those will be part of the full report. They're part of the original report that's sitting up on the website now. There's a piece that talks about Sandy Spring Road down to Musgrove on what it would take to harden the shoulder and create a new lane for either buses and HOV vehicles. But no, it was not studied as part of any of the new alternatives, 2A, 2B, or 2C, again, because we didn't find that there were really travel time benefits associated with it for either cars or for the flash in those northernmost extents.
Okay, thank you.
Hey,
Sure.
Corey, just to answer that last question, there is a little bit of minor widening necessary to accommodate that median bus lane, sort of just north and south of the bridge over 650. There's some restriping necessary across the bridge, but the bridge does not need to be widened.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Dan, see you've got your hand raised again.
Yeah, I'm gonna follow up on Harriet's comment about schedule. Considering where we are kind of June. Pretty well August is shot, pretty well everybody shuts down. So I think the next meeting, I think realistically is probably middle to late September. And I think there ought to be, I would like to see an in-person meeting in that time frame if we could. It's a lot easier to look at charts and comment on a chart and point to stuff. On the T&E piece, realizing we got an election coming up and there's going to be a number of new council members, and I'm not sure it's really any benefit to brief the T&E committee, the old T&E committee. I think you need to wait for the new one to be created. But I think you got enough other stuff between briefing, at least probably a couple times to the CAC and to the public and the stakeholders. So I think you're going to have more time, need more time in the fall. So just thoughts on the schedule.
Thanks, Dan.
I agree about the T&E committee.
Okay. Sanjita? Are there any other questions or comments?
Can I ask one more question? This is Harriet again.
Yeah, go for it.
Regarding the areas where you have dual, can you show that again? I see industrial, but I thought I heard Four Corners too, Stewart Lane. Yeah. What is the point of going single to dual to single? I guess I'm missing that around the Four Corners area.
It's really to try and just minimize the impacts and try and keep a narrow footprint. So for Alt 2, 2A, and 2B, they carry two lanes through Four Corners. But in order to do that, that fourth lane through Four Corners in both the northbound and the southbound direction needs to go away in order to fit that within the existing curbs without having any additional impacts beyond the curb, except in front of the school. So in 2C, there was an attempt made to get that fourth lane back to see what the value of the fourth lane was through Four Corners. So we had to shift the station a little bit south and then push onto the school's footprint a little bit more in order to get that to fit in, because in order to have the stations in the median, we really need both directions of the station to be in the median. You can't have one in the median because it doesn't work. It becomes difficult to communicate where the passenger should go. So that's what you see between the attempts to single track versus dual guideway, is an attempt to try and reduce costs and reduce impacts of the project.
So when you say you can't have one on the side and one in the middle, you mean just in particular in this area? Because I think in other areas you did have that.
So we could, if we wanted to, I guess there could be a version that looks at just a station in a direction. So we could do just the south station in the median, and then the northbound station would stay on the curb. That's not ideal because then whichever bus that stays on the curb is not getting any benefit, or we're having to queue jump it into the median, which adds travel time to it. So it is desirable to try and get both of the stations into the median so that we don't have to jump the bus in and out of the guideway. But in some cases, where it won't fit at all, we have made decisions that, we would put one station on the curb and one station in the median.
But Corey, I would also add that, with the dual lanes through Four Corners, that's one of the highest ridership stops for the Flash up and down the corridor. So there's a lot of pedestrian traffic, and it's also the longest crossing distances that pedestrians have, both on 193 and US 29. So having the dual bus lane there, gives them a little bit less crossing distance, and it gives the buses a little bit better operation because, with loading and unloading, the most passengers at that stop, they're going to be dwelling there longer.
I'd like to follow up on a comment you made, if I could. You said the only place, I think you're saying the only place you moved outside the existing curve is at the school. Is that a correct assessment?
Depending on the alternative. Obviously, when we talked about the Burnt Mill Station going into the meeting, there was an impact or a potential impact. Again, these are just concepts. There's no really detailed engineering to these, but we are suspecting that there would be an impact to the auto body shop next to the Trader Joe's if we were to put the station into the median.
But other than Four Corners and the one you just talked about, is there any others?
There may be some small, and again, we can get all the roll plans posted up on the website. There may be some small easements, just like the Flash project currently has, but no significant property impacts beyond those.
Okay, thank you.
It looks like in the body shop that it was completely taken out. Is that because it would affect, basically the building to begin with, and then you just take the whole thing?
So
I think in one of the alternatives, maybe the other one it didn't. Like, is the red line mean that's what you would?
The red line means that so obviously we don't need the whole, but unfortunately the way the building is situated, it's situating right behind the sidewalk, which is right next to US 29. So because we have to widen even a little bit, all we do is push that sidewalk and we're into the building. So there doesn't seem to be an option where we avoid hitting the building. Now, we don't need the whole property. Could it be repurposed or, converted into another use? I guess, that's not a decision for us to make, but based on our concepts, it looks like any shift to that existing curb line on the east side ends up impacting the building that's closest to 29.
And while you have that up there, I was thinking that those three lights, already the light at Lockwood is, a huge, it's complicated. Let's put it that way. It's a big backup. So then adding a light at Hillwood, and then there's another already at, the shopping center. Did your modeling show?
So,
any significant delay?
Harriet, that's a great question. And, sometimes it seems counterintuitive, but having more traffic lights, but having each traffic light have simpler sequencing and phasing can move traffic a little bit smoother. To be candid, the Hillwood proposed traffic signal is really for the pedestrians so they can get out, to the platform safely and on and off the buses. It probably will not be triggered, except for the few times an hour when the flash station is there and the pedestrians are boarding and alighting.
Oh, I see. So was there a problem keeping the station where it is now? Are you trying to move away from that intersection? At the shopping center where it is?
Well, it didn't really fit with the median concept. You know, it's faster.
Oh,
to
the
get
median.
Yeah, that's the main reason.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? We're at 8:30, so the meeting's scheduled to go for another 30 minutes. You know, we're here to answer questions. I've definitely heard the feedback about the schedule feeling too aggressive, so we will take that back and discuss that and get back to you all regarding that. I guess if there are no further questions, feel free to drop off as you feel you've gotten your questions answered, and we'll stick around in case there are any lingering questions or comments.
Okay, I have a lingering question. Since you
Yeah,
have another 30 minutes, I might as well. Mine is,
That's why we're here.
okay, great. And I don't want to, I mean, if there are other people who have questions, certainly chime in. Question on the current service and the local service. Number one is, I think you've added stops after the service started, like you have going over to FDA, and I forget where else you added, but are you planning to keep those, or is that going to change? And then my other observation is, I think as someone brought up before, the ridership on the local service is much higher because that's where people, live and get the bus from. And so they don't want to transfer, they don't want to take the time to transfer to the BRT, even if it might save a little time. They just want the one seat ride. So I think in the past you looked at truncating the routes and all of that, and I was just wondering if that is still, what you're looking at.
So not something that I'm looking at, again, since I don't work for the transit division. I think in terms of whatever plans were proposed as part of the original flash deployment, those have been scrapped because, obviously lots of time has passed. And there's this new Ride on Reimagine study that's looking at all of the routes comprehensively. So I think any significant changes to the service along US 29 will likely follow recommendations coming out of that study, which kind of really just got, underway, late last year, early this year. And that's an 18-month to 2-year study. The only additional stop that I'm aware of getting added was the one at FDA, and that was really an operational thing. There's no real infrastructure that was put in over there, and that was at the request of the campus. The folks at Ride On looked at it with FDA and determined that in the off-peak direction, given the schedule, that they could make the swing over to the FDA campus and still keep the travel times reasonably consistent. So it doesn't stop there in the peak direction.
Oh, okay. Well, also your Blue Line service, is only during rush hour, it seems like.
And that was
Is that
always
right?
that was always the plan. Yes.
Okay. And you haven't received any, negative feedback on that? Because when I've ridden it, I'd rather take the blue from up north than the orange, because it, goes off the corridor, but it's only available at certain times. And I didn't know if, I thought originally this was going to be 15-minute service all day. But for riders up in Burtonsville, it isn't, it seems like.
So it is that both routes operate on 15. So the orange and the blue each operate every 15 minutes when they're operating. So when they're both operating together, the common stations have a bus every 7.5 minutes. Again, since I don't get comments on the service, those go to Ride On. I'd have to ask them if they've gotten any complaints. I haven't heard anything kind of anecdotally or just, you know, in passing people in the virtual hallways about the blue service, but I will ask them and get back to you as, you know, and I think that the thought all along was that, again, as demand grew, they could run that service all day long. But that the thought was that initially it was probably only needed during the peak periods.
Okay. And I put in another request for more lighting at the Four Corners northbound station. Well, I mean, I know you might move it, but it's even though you have lights in the station itself, it's a very dark stretch.
So you're talking about along the sidewalk itself?
Yeah, like we had way back asked for a street light. Very dark.
Okay.
But I know it's complicated with Pepco, so.
Any other questions? Not trying to keep us here longer, but I definitely want to make sure that, you know, if there are questions, we answer them.
When you send the slides, can you send us what the bike and ped improvements are that were mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, those haven't changed. Really, we haven't revisited those as part of this additional effort. They've stayed the same, but yes, I will send everyone a link to where that sits on the website.
Okay, thank you. And that's funded, right?
We did get a little bit of funding to start advancing some of those pieces. So I don't know, we haven't had a chance yet to digest how much we're getting and which ones we would do first. But yeah, some of those improvements will get an influx of funding come July 1.
I noticed on the 355 project that there are a number of segments that are in mixed traffic. Is that right?
So on the 355 project, the piece in downtown Bethesda is currently proposed in mixed traffic. The piece through kind of the heart of Gaithersburg, so from like Summit Avenue up to where it comes off the corridor at the old mall site, and that was at the city's request. They were just uncomfortable with the property impacts that would be associated with putting in even a single lane bus lane. And then up in the far north, where the traffic levels really don't warrant bus lanes yet. there, yes, there are some segments of the 355 project that don't have bus lanes.
Do you mind putting up the slide for the Four Corners alternative? Guess it's 2. Yeah, thank you.
So this was the original.
Okay.
This one is 2B, which is the optimized one. So the change with it is converting the lane widths back to either their existing lane width or at a minimum 11 feet.
Okay. And
would you like
2C? Yeah.
2C? So this is the one that moves it down to Lanark. So again, the distinction here is that we bring back that 4th lane through here that drops just off the screen here, and then the 4th lane in the southbound direction.
So for the southbound station, they would have to, I guess if they want to walk over to Lanark Way, they would cross over to the crosswalk and then, see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, this isn't a fully engineered drawing,
Yeah.
but what would happen would be that there would be all 3 legs of the intersection, because it's not a full 4-leg intersection, but the 3 legs of the intersection would get crosswalks. So if you were going to the northbound station, it would likely use the existing crosswalk, but there would be a new crosswalk that would get added to facilitate the crossing to the southbound station.
Okay, thank you. That was my question. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I'm gonna 8:42. Looks like at this point there's only 2 of you that I don't recognize as either county staff or consultants. So are there any last dying questions that either of you would like to ask or share? Otherwise, I'm happy to let everyone go a couple minutes early and go on to the rest of your evening.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Harriet. Thanks for joining. All right. Well, with that, let's see, Cicero, I see you unmuted yourself. Did you have a question?
No, sir. I just wanted to say thank you very much. It's, very informative and good meeting. And I look forward to receiving the slides, and I'll send you any comments I may have.
All right. Appreciate it. Have a good night.
Night.
All right, everyone. I'm going to stop sharing and we're going to call it a night. So thank you for attending, providing lots of feedback, and we'll be back in touch. So good night.